6 Peculiar Things About Chuuya Nakahara, According to Dazai, by Blowing Your Mind, Chapter 4. Chuuya was brash, and everyone knew it. He was the most ravenous pawn of the port mafia, but not in the mindless way that Akutagawa had become, because Chuuya had sense, despite his sometimes stupid decisions. He had a reason for doing everything. Dazai would say that Chuuya's brashness and his own cold intellect balanced them out. It was what made them such a feared team amongst the underground, double black. Though sometimes Chuuya's decisions got him in trouble, he never seemed to learn from them. They had gone on a mission, the type where they had to stay along the outskirts of some small town far away from Yokohama that Dazai had never heard of before. It was not even on the map. The population, if Dazai had to guess, was no more than 200 people. Apparently, they had some sort of nomadic way of living and settled down as if they had missed the Neolithic Revolution years ago. Dazai and Chuuya's business was not with the people, but with the organization that was encroaching on the land. The people had paid the port mafia for protection, and even if it was the minimal amount of pay, Mori had sent the most feared duo out in the case. Dazai had to wonder why Mori had done such a thing, and the only thing he could conclude was that the boss had an ulterior motive. It was often that he did, but it was pesky for Dazai because he would have to tread lightly with the situation. Which was exactly why Dazai was perplexed to learn that the strike team who was threatening the village was the Port Mafia. Though in the end he supposed it made sense. Mori would profit much more from killing those in the town and taking their money now than from them only paying him half of it. And, to test them, Mori wanted to see what he and Chuuya's actions would be. Dazai would try his best to keep the real reason under wraps, but that was easier said than done. "This place is small as shit." Chuuya kicked a rock on the side of the gravel road and watched as it flew somewhere down the slope to their right. "What do they even do around here?" "Well, if Chuuya needs a history lesson, villages with this type of lifestyle tend to farm, housekeep, and farm until they grow into an even more complex society. Though, of course, that will take years." Chuuya scrunched his nose in disgust. "That's a damn sad way of living." "Chuuya, don't be like that. The founders of Yokohama worked very hard for us." "Yeah, good for them," Chuuya snorted as they entered the village. Of course, Dazai had known Mori's ulterior motive the moment he stepped foot in the town. He did not say a word to Chuuya. "Hello, are you the help that was sent to us?" A woman greeted them kindly once they entered the boundaries of the village. "Would you like some tea?" Chuuya looked at Dazai, and Dazai shrugged. "Well, I suppose I don't see why not," he answered. They were camping out on the side of the village, and even if Chuuya didn't wish to stay for more than a night, Dazai had taunted him into setting up tents anyways. The woman was around middle-aged, and her clothing, as expected from a small town cut off from society, was old-fashioned. She led them to one of the nearest houses. Dazai ducked under the doorway and snickered when Chuuya didn't have to bend down. The inside of the cottage was cozy, more so than any other place Dazai had been. "Do you need any information while you're here?" the woman offered as she set the tray of cups in front of them, sitting down. "Why, yes, that would come in handy," Dazai hummed, leaning forward against the table. The woman didn't seem to mind his mannerisms, but Chuuya whacked him anyway. "When did the attacks start?" "Well, not too long ago. We caught them early. Raiders coming through and robbing our homes for small luxuries. It seems that we made the right choice to choose the protection of the port mafia." Dazai narrowed his eyes. Or the wrong choice. Chuuya looked like he was about to open his mouth to ask a follow-up question, but suddenly he paused and let out a surprised noise. Dazai raised an eyebrow, and Chuuya twisted his body to reveal a small child, no older than a toddler, gripping onto the hair he had been growing out. Dazai had preferred it longer. "What the He paused. "Heck." Dazai snickered, and the woman smiled warmly. "I deeply apologize." She rose from her seat and retrieved the child, who still had a death grip on Chuuya's hair. She's not old enough to know manners." "It's fine," Chuuya said, strained as the little girl tugged some more. "Fire! Fire!" she announced proudly. "Yes, yes," the woman assured the child, finally getting her to let go of Chuuya's hair, much to Dazai's disappointment. "His hair does look like fire, doesn't it?" Chuuya flushed, and Dazai noted to tease him for that later. "So, do you happen to know the organization these men are from?" Chuuya tried to ask again, but he was foiled when suddenly the child had plopped down onto his lap and was making grabby gestures toward his face. Dazai was now openly snickering at the situation, and the best part was that Chuuya could not even move to elbow him because his arms were occupied with the child in his lap. She was squirming around, and finally Chuuya gave up and lifted her to his face so she could feel along his cheeks and nose. Dazai eyed the expression on his partner's face. It was not one of anger or annoyance, but a surprising fondness. Dazai supposed he had been somewhat good with children, given that he was the leader of the sheep, but this was unexpected. "I'm sorry," the woman apologized again, and Chuuya waved her off. "What's your name?" he asked the little girl, who was now trying to poke his eyes out. "Honoka," she stuttered over her words. "Honoka," Chuuya repeated. "That's a very pretty name, Honoka." The little girl seemed to blush, and Dazai smirked. "Quite the charmer, aren't you, Slug?" Chuuya's mood immediately shifted when he looked at Dazai. "And you're a dang idiot." "Watch your mouth there, Chuuya. There are children present." They ended up leaving the cottage when the sun had started to set, but that only meant that their work had just begun. Dazai would rather not have Chuuya patrol the town on his own, but if he was there to protect them, then there would be no one guarding them and looking for any suspicious activity while Dazai hung back and watched from a distance, as they usually did. Though, unluckily for Dazai, Chuuya had found out the plan only hours earlier. He did not know how, but he was assuming that he had seen the attack squad along the borders and recognized their uniforms as they belonged to the Port Mafia. But from his place sitting on a tree and watching, when Dazai had suddenly been punched in the face, he knew that Chuuya was angered. "Ouch!" Dazai complained as he rubbed his sore cheek. "You didn't have to punch me out of a tree, did you, Chuuya?" He looked up at Chuuya to see the scarlet glow that overtook his body. He looked absolutely pissed as he grabbed Dazai by the collar and dragged him up to stand. "You knew, didn't you?" he growled in Dazai's face like a rabid dog. Dazai blinked innocently. "Knew what?" Once again, Dazai was thrown to the ground. He would have bruises tomorrow. "The Port Mafia is the one attacking these people," he shouted, louder than he needed to, considering they were supposed to be hidden. "Why aren't we supposed to be the ones defending them?" Dazai got up from the dirt and dusted himself off once the glow left Chuuya's body. I figured that Chuuya's mind had picked this up by now. This is a test from the boss to see what we would do in this situation. Chuuya scanned Dazai, and he must have seen the truth in his words because he clenched his fist. "The boss expects us to let him kill all of those people when our job is to protect them?" "It is a choice, Chuuya. The Mafia or a town you have never lived in." Dazai knew that Chuuya would have trouble with this decision because Chuuya was the most loyal person Dazai knew, but he also had a strong moral code. He was loyal to the Port Mafia, and second to his moral code, and that was what Mori had been testing. Chuuya did not pass the test. "We are in the Mafia, Chuuya. We are not heroes," Dazai argued, but his words were no longer getting through to his partner. "I don't give a shit," Chuuya seethed. "They don't deserve it." Dazai's mind flashed to the child Chuuya had held, and he knew that he would not get to talk Chuuya out of this. "Then I'm sure you know of the consequences." Chuuya nodded. "I don't care about the consequences." And then he was off. It was a smart thing on his part not to take the squad on directly to avoid casualties of his own team. He simply warned the townspeople to evacuate, and Dazai from his perch on the tree watched closely as Chuuya took the little girl he had previously held and helped her reunite with her mother. He wondered if it would be worth it. In the end, after they arrived from the mission, it had been worth it to Chuuya, despite the boss's anger. They had reported to him together, both standing tall as Mori's gaze lingered over them before landing on Chuuya. Dazai, is it my understanding that you did not stop Chuuya in his effort to save people? The boss asked, and Dazai felt himself tense up. No, I did not. He did. Chuuya cut him off, and Dazai raised an eyebrow. Chuuya was defending him? He tried to talk me out of it, so it was my damn choice to make. He followed orders, even if they were veiled, and I didn't. Dazai wondered if Chuuya knew his reaction to the possibility of punishment. Had he seen it when he first arrived? That would certainly explain why he shut his mouth after the fact. I see, Mori purred, his scalpel gleaming under the dim lighting. Then, Dazai, you may proceed home and go get some rest, though I must ask Chuuya to stay longer if he doesn't have any plans after. Dazai noted the tense way Chuuya shook his head. Then you are dismissed. Dazai stiffly bowed and turned his head away from the boss, giving Chuuya one lingering look before exiting the office. Dazai could not do anything in this situation, and it was bound to happen one way or another. Even so, he found himself waiting by the door on his way out, shooting a glare at the two guards in front of it, who quickly pretended they didn't see him, and he waited, and waited, and waited some more, until he looked at his clock to see about half the hour had gone by. Usually Mori would have been done by now. Dazai glared at the door from where he had been sitting against the wall and saw no movement. And when he strained his ears, he heard no sounds. Mori had made the walls soundproof, but sometimes his subordinates' screams could be heard through them. He didn't hear a peep from Chuuya. He was ready to ask one of the men to poke their head into the room to try their best to avoid getting a scalpel thrown at them. The door cracked open, and Chuuya slipped out. Dazai stood up and immediately scanned over Chuuya's condition. Their punishments obviously varied because when Dazai received his, he always walked out with fresh bandages on and didn't appear affected in the slightest. Chuuya was different because his clothes were in tatters, blood stained from many cuts that now adorned his body. They weren't deep enough to call for stitches, but there were many, and if sanitizer was spread over them... Dazai immediately knew Mori's objective. He wanted Chuuya to walk out of headquarters that day, beaten and battered for everyone to see. He wanted Chuuya to live through the humiliation of it, and that was one thing Dazai could stop. He rose from the ground and idly wondered just why he was helping Chuuya when he had received direct punishment from the boss, but Chuuya had done the same thing for him on many occasions. How did it go? Dazai asked, more of a way to gauge Chuuya's mental state at the moment than a genuine curiosity. How'd you expect? Chuuya responded, somewhat dully, his voice sounding rough and nearly gone. He leaned heavily against the wall to catch his breath and didn't even protest when Dazai took one of his arms to sling over his shoulders. He was not in the best shape, but they had dealt with worse. You... Chuuya hissed when they accidentally bumped hips on their way to the parking garage. You don't have to do this. This was my fault. You were simply doing what you believed was right. Dazai cut in. And Chuuya was in no condition to operate his motorcycle, so Dazai waved one of the drivers down. Though that attitude will get you in trouble in a place like this. Yeah, Chuuya agreed grimly. I know. But will you still continue to do it? Chuuya was silent, and Dazai took that as a yes. Throughout their drive in the back seat, Chuuya gazed outside and hid his winces at every bump the car made as Dazai gave clipped directions to Chuuya's apartment. Dazai was not used to the silence, but he would accept it for now. You can go home now. Chuuya grumbled as he slid out of the car. But Dazai was already on the other side, assisting him. "Sorry, Chibi. I'm bored and I wish to bother you at this time." Chuuya grunted, and Dazai was sure he understood the real meaning of his words. They ended up taking the back way to Chuuya's apartment, so that nobody would call the police on them. And on their way up, Dazai ignored Chuuya's pained noises until they stumbled into his large bathroom. They knew the routine. They'd done it many times before. Chuuya set the water on the bath to warm and hissed as he lowered himself into the water, and Dazai watched with morbid fascination as the blood that leaked from his wounds mingled with the water, turning it a dirty color. Chuuya leaned his head against the back of the porcelain while Dazai grabbed the medical supplies. 20 minutes later, after he was sure the water was cooling, Dazai tapped Chuuya's head to wake him up and bent down to let out the water. Their routine continued. Chuuya, half asleep, pulled on shorts and sat on the counter, eerily silent as Dazai wrapped him in bandages and disinfected his cuts. "Now Chuuya matches me," Dazai announced as he pulled back and Chuuya looked in the mirror to see his bandaged body. "I guess," Chuuya huffed, lacking enthusiasm. Dazai packed away the supplies and nudged Chuuya's knee. "Do you plan on doing it again?" he asked for a second time. "I'll do what I have to," Chuuya replied immediately. Dazai clicked his tongue. "That will get you nowhere in the Port Mafia, you know." "I don't give a damn." Chuuya slipped off the countertop and stumbled into his bedroom. "I don't regret my decisions, and I won't now." "Such brash behavior," Dazai tisked, and Chuuya shrugged. "Isn't that what makes us a good team?" Dazai paused. He supposed Chuuya was correct. That night, Dazai slept next to him. "It's our only chance!" Chuuya shouted over the sound of gunfire as if Dazai simply wasn't listening to him. And he was, in fact, not. His eyes were focused on the enemy from his place behind the tree next to Chuuya. The bark split dangerously close to his face as a bullet splintered into the wood. "No," Dazai denied. "This is a last resort. I can think of another plan." "When?" Chuuya took Dazai by the shoulder and turned him around to face him. "Before or after we get fucking shot." "We do not know the limits of your ability enough to go against this large of a group," Dazai argued. But he knew it was in vain, because once Chuuya's mind was made up, he rarely ever changed it. "Well, we might as well find out now, huh?" Chuuya grinned savagely, as if he was the bloodthirsty one, and Dazai knew it was all for show. They had been ambushed. They had been ambushed multiple times before, but this was one of the only times that they had truly been caught off guard. The tree against Dazai's back groaned as if it would fall over any moment, and Chuuya made a familiar noise when a bullet barely grazed his shoulder. He scooted closer to Dazai, and Dazai's skin tingled. "I'm going to use it whether you like it or not," Chuuya hissed, dangerously close to his ear. He stood up, and now that he wasn't touching Dazai, his gravity activated, blocking the bullets and creating a safe haven, if only for a moment. "You better be there for me." Chuuya looked down on him as he slid off his gloves. Dazai casually leaned back against the tree. Chuuya is not being a loyal dog and following instructions. Chuuya crouched in front of him, and Dazai took his gloves. "I think I'm being plenty damn loyal saving your ass." Yes, loyal, in his own strange way, because Chuuya would always be a loose cannon. The wretched words slipped past Chuuya's lips as he faced the enemies, a sea of them all firing ruthlessly. "O granters of dark disgrace, you need not wake me again." There was not much that Dazai disliked. He did not like walking on glass around Mori when conversating. He did not like jobs that lasted more than a night. And, most of all, he disliked whenever that sentence was uttered from Chuuya's lips. Their forest surroundings quickly turned into ground zero as it flared a demonic red color. The trees around them decimated and crumbled to ash as Chuuya's unhinged laugh was loud and clear over the roar. That was also one of the many things Dazai disliked. The laugh. It wasn't Chuuya's. He tasted copper on his tongue, and his gut sank just as it did each time Chuuya unleashed his power. Dazai watched as in a matter of minutes, the squad that had been threatening their lives were torn apart. Corpses smeared against the dead grass as if they had never been alive in the first place. This was child's play for Arahabaki. The familiar sight of blood started to pour from Chuuya's nose, and soon enough, he was hunching over in a strangely contorted position to cough it up onto one of the fallen men, and when he came back up, his throat was not given a break as he laughed some more. It sounded like nails grating against a chalkboard. When the crimson started to sprout from Chuuya's whited-out eyes and started to roll down his cheeks, Dazai knew it was time. It was the longest he had let Chuuya go. He had been too busy admiring the destruction and carnage Arahabaki left behind. He needed to move, to pick his legs up and save his partner, but he couldn't move. His legs locked up. Fear was a foreign thing to Dazai, an emotion he had never experienced yet in his life, but facing his dying partner, the face of destruction, Dazai felt a small pang in his chest. Arahabaki laughed some more, until Chuuya's vocal cords were raw from overuse, and the god continued to abuse his partner's body. Dazai bit down on his tongue, hard, and dug his blunt fingernails into his palms before all he could taste was blood. It calmed him. He left from his place from behind the overturned tree, stripped of his bark, and darted low to avoid the turbulent of winds until he finally pushed past the nebula of destruction and reached its core. Either Arahabaki couldn't see him as a threat, or he didn't care, because he only noticed Dazai at the last possible moment. For a split second, Dazai saw it. The pain in his eyes that were not Chuuya's. Before he grabbed onto his partner's wrist, it was as if a flip had been switched. Their surroundings returned to a deep blue, no longer distorted, and the ringing in Dazai's ears subsided. Almost immediately, Chuuya collapsed. Which was a new thing to them, because the other times he had managed to get up on his own with Dazai's assistance. "Chuuya," Dazai asked as he lowered him to the ground, situating his unusually limp body to a more comfortable position. There was no response. "Chuuya," he tried again, slapping Chuuya's blood-smeared cheek lightly as his eyelashes fluttered. He was unconscious. That was certainly not good. "Chuuya, I need you to look at me." Dazai tapped his cheek again, because there was no doubt that Chuuya had a head injury, and this time hazy blue eyes cracked open. "Good." Dazai approved, and Chuuya blinked groggily, before letting out a wet cough that made Dazai cringe slightly. Blood painted Chuuya's red face, and it dripped down his chin. It was nothing compared to the crimson that coated his whole body, but Dazai still wiped it away from his chin anyway. "Chuuya, you are bleeding internally." Something that hadn't happened when he used corruption before. "I need you to stay awake." Chuuya didn't seem to want to listen to directions because his eyes started to drift shut again, and Dazai slapped him once more, this time with more force. 10 minutes. Dazai had called for backup right when he knew Chuuya would use corruption, and the estimated arrival time had been cut in half. "This is why you shouldn't be so brash, slug." Though Dazai's berating seemed to be the least of Chuuya's worries, because suddenly he brought up a weakened hand to touch Dazai's face. And when Dazai realized he was attempting to get more skin-to-skin contact, he brought up his own hand and held it over Chuuya's. Even so. "Can you still hear him?" Dazai asked. "Even with my ability in use?" Chuuya nodded shakily, and his breath hitched as if he was going to say something. Dazai waited patiently for him to gain his bearings, and when he did speak, his voice sounded as if it had been withered away. "I can hear him. He is me." Out of context, the words would have been confusing, but Dazai understood them well. He knew Chuuya suffered with Arahabaki inside of him, one of the downfalls of holding such power. "No, you are not," Dazai was quick to say, giving Chuuya a small shake when he thought he had drifted off again. "Arahabaki is a separate being with only ill intentions." Dazai separated Chuuya from Arahabaki because, despite his partner's belief, they were completely separate entities. "Yeah," Chuuya rasped, though he didn't sound like he was agreeing. He closed his eyes again. Following the routine, Dazai slapped him once more. When Chuuya looked up at Dazai, it was with dead eyes. They did not hold to their usual flare, and Dazai's throat went dry at the sight. He saw that look when he looked into the mirror. It looked so wrong on Chuuya. "Have you given up?" Chuuya scoffed and slightly turned his head so he was avoiding Dazai's eyes. I can't." "Yes, you can." Dazai clenched his teeth. Blood must have been staining them by now. "You cannot die now. That is selfish of you, Chuuya." It drew a little chuckle from his partner that sounded raspy. "Hypocrite." It was the truth, but if Dazai had been striving for a way to die this long only for Chuuya to die before him, would be a cruel fate. "If you're going to die," Dazai continued, simply grasping at words to say to keep Chuuya focused on him. In the distance, a car pulled up to them. "Then at least do it meaningfully. A double suicide, perhaps." Dazai was delighted to see a small spark return to Chuuya's eyes. Small, but there as his eyes widened. "Are you?" Before he could finish his question, Hirotsu was standing over them, looking down grimly. Dazai tapped Chuuya on the shoulder one last time as he handed his partner over to the leader of the Black Lizard. "Wait!" Chuuya wheezed, and reached a hand out to Dazai. "Finish what you were saying." "Shush, Chuuya. I'll tell you later," Dazai told his partner as they loaded him into the back of the car. Later at the hospital, Chuuya didn't remember a thing. Such brash decisions would eventually make Chuuya break one day. But Dazai would be there when he did. Okay, it's hard to explain, but sometimes a day will have a better recording voice than another day. And so I can sit down sometimes and be like, yes, this is the good voice that I need to record. And then sometimes it's not, but anyway. I started out this chapter with like a good quote, air quotes, with a good voice, and then it just slowly degrades throughout the whole fic until I'm left with like this raspy, shitty voice. And I try to like speak normally, but then it just kind of fades back into this.